Okay, good day. Welcome back to the continuation of our discussion on lesson number 10. So, for this lesson or for this part of the lesson, we're going to talk about the subject-verb agreement. Okay, so when we talk about subject-verb agreement, we should master this so that we could become proficient in English, and we should master the rules on subject-verb agreement so that when we are talking or when we are speaking and writing, our grammar would be always correct. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 17 of the subject-verb agreements. Okay, so let's start with the rule number one. The verb agrees with its subject in numbers. Okay, so meaning the verb will always adjust to the number of the subject of our sentence. So for example, plural subjects take plural verbs, and singular subjects take singular verbs. Okay, so the linking verb be, or the words or the verbs be, have, and do changes in both the present tense and the past tense. So here's an example sentence wherein rule number one is applied. Okay, so events. So that is the subject of our sentence. So events in our lives actually influence our course through life. So the verb influence agrees with the subject events, which is in plural form. Okay. So another example. So for instance, an important decision influences lifestyle. Okay, so you will notice that if your subject has an S, but not all of the time, okay, in most cases, if your subject has an S, your verb must not have or must not has an S. Okay, so that's rule number one. So here's another example wherein we use a plural pronoun. We have nothing to do with David until we find him. Okay, so again, the verb or the plurality and singularity of our verb will always adjust to the number of our subject in the sentence. Okay, so here's the last example. Most writers, okay, so writers is in plural form. So meaning our verb must be in its plural form. So our most writers do not give up until they have gained literary masterpiece. Okay, so that's rule number one. Next will be rule number two. So the verb agrees with the subject, not with the object of the preposition. Okay, so if you want to identify uh, the form of your verb, if it is in singular or plural form, always look at the subject or look for the subject of your sentence. Okay, so the simple subject is never within a prepositional phrase. Okay, so when a subject is modified by a prepositional phrase, make sure the verb agree or agrees with the actual subject and not with the object of the preposition. So for example, so the work of Elizabethan writers focuses on the rebirth of learning. So the subject in this sentence is the word work, not the writers or Elizabethan writers, because Elizabethan writers is the object of the object of the preposition. So the prepositional phrase here is of the Elizabethan writers, which describes the work. Okay, so the verb focuses agrees with our subject, which is the work. Another example, high levels of mercury occur in some fish. So in here, we are talking about levels. Okay, that is our subject or the subject of our sentence. And Mercury is the subject of the preposition. So the verb must agree with our subject, which is levels or high levels. So the third rule is the verb agrees with the subject, not with the predicate noun or predicate nominative. Okay, or the noun of the predicate. Okay, so example, our topic is the stories written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. So in here, the subject of the sentence is the word topic, not Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, so even though Nathaniel Hawthorne is a name or a noun, but it is not the subject of our sentence. Okay, so here the verb agrees with the subject, which is the topic. Another example, books and magazines. So that those are plural subjects are the only material for his report. Okay. Other example, plain shirt and denim pants are his attire for the party. Okay, so again, for rules 1 to 3, you will always look for the subject of the sentence and the verb must agree to the number of the subject. Okay, and then rule number 4, in an inverted sentence or in sentence in which the subject follows the verb, take care in locating the simple subject and make sure that the verb agrees with the subject. Okay, so since in an inverted sentence, usually the verb comes first before the subject, so you must be careful when locating or identifying the subject of your sentence because you might find it or you might be incorrect when locating it, or you might be confused when you are looking for the subject of the sentence. So always be careful when identifying the subject of your sentence if you are dealing with inverted sentences. Okay, so for example, or additional rule or additional note for this, inverted sentences often begin with prepositional phrase. Yeah, so don't be confused with the object of the preposition for the subject. So again, in rule number 4, you will go back to rule number 2. You need to identify the real subject of the sentence and the verb must agree to it, not to the object of the preposition. For example, in Boston, live many businessmen. Okay, so in here, since it is uh, an inverted sentence. So our subject is businessmen. And since it is in plural form, our verb must also be in its plural form. Okay, so in Boston is our prepositional phrase, and the object of the preposition is the word Boston. Okay, so since it is the object of the preposition, not the subject of the sentence, the verb must agree with the word businessman. Another additional note, in inverted sentences beginning with there and here, or the adverbs of place, look for the subject after the verb. Okay, so that's your clue. If the sentence started or starts with the word there and here, the noun or the subject of the sentence will be located after the verb. Okay, so that's your clue in this part of rule number 4. For example, here lies the greatest writer of all time. Okay, so the subject here is the word writer. So if we will be converting it into a normal sentence, the sentence would look like this. The greatest writer of all time lies here. Okay, so the subject of this sentence is the word writer. Another example, there gather three young leaders who wish to serve the nation. So the subject of this sentence is the word leaders. And since it is in plural form, the subject must agree, the verb must agree to it. The verb must be in its plural form. Rule number 5, a collective noun names a group. Okay, so in here, collective noun is considered singular when it refers to a group as a whole. So if you are using collective noun to refer a certain group as a whole, okay, you are referring to the group itself, the verb must also be in its singular form. So consider a collective noun plural when it refers to each member of a group individually. So if you are using a collective noun to refer to a group as a whole, the verb must be in its plural form. But if you are using it to refer to each member of that group, the verb must be in its plural form. So for example, the class. So you are referring to the whole class. Okay? The class has agreed on the colors of the new uniform. This example is for the first rule, wherein you are referring to a whole group, or you are using a collective noun to refer to a whole group. And second example, the class have been debating, so meaning each member of that class has his or her argument, and they are somehow having conversation. Okay, the class have been debating on the colors of the uniform since this morning. So meaning each student or each member of that group has his own argument. Okay, so they are somehow having talks about the uniform or about the new color of the uniform. So again, in rule number 5, if you will be using collective nouns, take note of its usage. If you use it to refer to a whole group, the verb must be in singular form. But if you are using it to refer to each member of that group, the verb must be in the plural form. Okay? So that's rule number 5. For rule number 6, we are having here, or this rule is for special nouns. So special nouns are certain nouns that end in S, such as, or for example, mumps, measles, and mathematics. These words take singular verbs. Okay, so if you are using it in a sentence, your verb must be in the singular form. For example, mumps is a disease, or measles is an example of a disease. Okay? So mathematics is my favorite subject. No. Mathematics is my favorite subject. So certain nouns that end in S, such as scissors, pants, binoculars, and eyeglasses, take plural verbs. Okay, so these nouns, uh, they always have S on their on with them. Okay, for example, the eyeglasses were broken. The eyeglasses were broken. Scissors are needed to finish this project. So for example, if you are using just if you are referring to a scissor, okay, so a pair of scissors. Okay, yeah. So many nouns that end in ICS or X may be singular or plural depending upon their meaning. Okay, so in here it gets a little tricky since these words have these words always have S on there or with them. So you may be confused in some cases. So for example, politics. So you are referring to the whole politics itself. So politics is an interesting subject to discuss. Okay, so the politics, the whole politics itself, you are referring to it as a single entity. Okay, so in here, you're going to use singular verb. But if you are referring to different politics, like for example, different principles, different theories, different strategies or techniques, different beliefs. So politics reveal. So in here, you will be using plural verb. Okay, politics reveal varied personalities of known leaders. So meaning the different types of politics, okay, reveal their true identities. Okay, so that's for rule number 6. Okay, so always remember that in some cases of special nouns, you need to use singular verb and or you need to use plural verbs. Okay, so for rule number 7, the pronoun you, whether singular or plural, requires a plural verb. Okay, so for example, you are using the pronoun you to refer to your friend, to your to one of your friends. Okay, so for example, you, or you are going to use you to refer to your friends, all of them. Either of the two, you're going to use plural verb. Okay, so for example, Freddy. So this is a direct speech, or you are directly talking to Freddy. Okay, Freddy, you are one, or you are the one chosen to represent the class tomorrow. Okay, so you are referring to him even though Freddy is just a single person, or the use of you here is just a singular you. Still you're going to use plural verb. For example, another example wherein you is used as a plural pronoun. Okay, so Raven and Denver. So in here you are talking about two persons or two people. Okay, Raven and Denver, you both do well in your chosen fields. Okay, so again, if you are using you, whether it refers to a singular noun or you are referring to plural or to many person or people, in here you're going to use plural verb. Okay, and then for rule number 8, when a noun that indicates amount refers to a total that is considered as one unit, it is considered singular. Just like in collective nouns. If you are using collective nouns to refer to a group as a whole, it requires a singular verb. But if you are using it to refer to the individual group or to individual member of that group, it requires a plural verb. So same rule applies in number 8. If you are uh, using an amount to refer to a total number of a certain entity, it is considered singular. When it refers to a number of individual units, it is considered plural. So for example, 20,000 pesos is enough for tomorrow's party. So meaning you are referring to the whole 20,000 pesos amount. Okay, that's the total amount you needed for that party or that you will be needing for that party. Okay, so in here it is considered as one unit, which is 20,000 pesos. Okay, for example number 2, 300 pesos are found on the table. So in here, you are referring to each or individual 100 pesos. So meaning you saw 3 100 pesos. Okay? So you are referring to those 3 100 pesos that are found on the table. Okay? So meaning there are 3 100 pesos bills on the table. Okay, so another example, 9 years is too long. So you are referring to the whole 9 years. Okay, so it requires singular subject. So in here, 9 lonely years. So in here, you are referring to each year of those 9 years. Okay, so each year of those 9 lonely years have passed. Okay, so that is for rule number 8. So for rule number 9, a title is always singular even if a noun within the title is plural. So it will always be singular since you are just referring to one text. Okay, that title refers to one text. So it will become plural if you are referring to numerous titles. But if you are just using one title, even though if that title has plural words or plural nouns in it, it will always be singular. So for example, dirty hands. So don't be confused with the word hands here. So dirty hands is a title, okay? So dirty hands is a good declamation piece. So that's an example of or for rule number 9. A title will always be singular even though it has plural nouns in it. Okay? It is always singular because you are just referring to one or the title of one text. For rule number 10, a compound subject that is joined by and or both and is plural unless parts or its part or its parts belong to one unit or they both refer to the same person or thing. Okay? So again, a compound subject that is joined by and or both requires plural verb because you are referring to two or more subjects. But in some cases, and is plural. Okay, and will always be plural unless it will become singular unless if parts belong to one unit. Okay, if one of the words joined by and belongs to one unit or the words that and joined refer to the same person or thing. For example, the student and the teacher. So in here, you are referring to both the students and the teacher. They are plural. Okay, so the student and the teacher help each other to produce a good output. On example number 2, both mountaineering and teaching are fun. So you are referring to both activity. In in example number 3, peanut butter and jelly is a favorite combination. So in here, even though it's weird, peanut butter and jelly is a partner in crime or they are tandem. Like for example, cup and saucer. They they we can consider them as a single entity. So in this case, we're going to use singular verb. Okay? Another example, my mother and friend stays with me the whole time. So in here, you will notice that our verb is in singular form. Why? Because the words joined by and, the words mother and friend refers to the same person. Okay? Or describes or it refers to a single person. Okay? So if you will analyze it carefully, in here, that underlined subject, which is the mother and friend, is just one person. My mother, which is also my friend. Okay, that is the meaning of that underlined subject. Her mother and also her friend at the same time her friend or is also her friend. Okay, so my mother and friend. So her mother is also her friend. That's the meaning of that sentence. Okay. So the verb will become plural if you write it this way. My mother and my friend. So meaning you are referring to your mother or you are with your mother and your friend or friends. Okay, but on the first sentence, you refer to your mother as also as your friend. Okay, so in there you are just referring to one person, but in in sentence number 2 you are referring to two people or two different person or people. Okay, so for rule number 11, when compound subjects are joined by or nor or by either or neither nor, the verb always agrees with the nearer subject. Okay, so since in here we are referring to two or more subjects, so you will always look at the subject nearest or near or nearer to the verb. Okay, and the verb will agree to that nearest subject. Okay, so for example, either the host or the visitors. So since the word visitors is the nearest subject to the verb will agree to that subject. Okay? So in here the verb discuss agrees with the subject visitors since this is the nearest subject. Okay, so the students or their teacher. So since in this example, the subject teacher is the nearest subject to the verb, so the verb will agree to it. Okay, the students and their teacher presents the project proposal. Okay, so that is rule number 11. So if you have compound subjects or if you have many subjects in your sentence and they are joined by the words or by the conjunctions or nor, either or neither nor, you always look at the nearest subject to the verb and the verb will agree to it. Number 12, when many a or many a, every, or each precedes a compound subject, the subject is considered singular. Okay, so um take note of those uh what do we call this? Take note of those adjectives. Okay. So for example, many a boy and a girl has volunteered to help. So since based on the rule, if the subject is being preceded by these words, the verb must be in its singular form. Okay, another example, every teacher, student, and non-teaching employee is empowered to fulfill specific tasks. So in here, you are referring to each one of your subjects. So in that case, the verb must be in its singular form. Okay, another example. Each parent and child is given a responsibility. So the verb must agree to the subject which is being preceded by the word each. So the subject must be in its singular form. Okay, so that's rule number 12. And then for rule number 13, if a singular subject is linked to another noun by an intervening expression, or there is a phrase between the subject and the verb. So for example, such as accompanied by, together with, as well as, the subject is still considered singular. Okay, so in here you will just refer to rule number 1 or rule number 3. You will always look for the simple subject of your sentence. Okay, so for example, the senator as well as his supporters, don't be confused with the word supporters. This is an example of an intervening expression. This is just an additional information about the sentence. If we will be removing it, the sentence will become, the senator entertains all the question by the press. Okay, so that's our simple sentence. But since we want to add another information on our sentence, so we put an intervening expression, which is as well as his supporters. So the subject of this sentence is the senator. And since it is in singular form, the verb must be in singular form. Okay, another example, the school principal together with the faculty. So in here, the subject is principal or the school principal. So the verb must agree to it and it is in singular form. So 14 or rule number 14, the expression the number requires a singular verb because you are referring to the whole number. Okay, you are referring to it as one unit. But if you have an expression a number, it requires a plural verb. So we will go back to um, the rule of collective nouns. So in here, we are referring to each one of those numbers. Okay, so for example, the number of pupils is my advisory. The number of pupils in my advisory class is 49. So you are referring to the whole number. Okay, so it requires singular verb. But if you have a sentence like this, a number of students were sent to the office for their achievements. So in here, you are referring to a large number of students. Okay, you are referring to many students. In example number 1, you are referring to the whole number of the class. But in here, you are referring to different or many students. So your verb must be in plural form. Okay, for rule number 15, fractions take singular verb if the object of the of phrase that follows is singular, and it will require plural verb if the subject of the of phrase is plural. So for example, 1/3 of the budget. So the word budget is in its singular form, so meaning the verb must be in its singular form. So the of phrase is of the budget, since the subject of our of or the object of our of phrase is in its plural singular form, the verb must be in its singular form. Okay, for example, another example, 1/3 of the visitors. Since the object of our of phrase is in its plural form, so based on the rule, the the verb must be in its plural form. Okay, so if you are referring to fraction, if you will be using fraction on your sentences, take note of the object of your of phrase. If it is in singular form, the verb must be in singular form. If the subject or if the object of the of phrase is in plural form, the verb must be in plural form or must be in its plural form. For rule number 16, The verb agrees with the relative pronoun, such as who, or the relative pronoun used as a subject. The relative pronoun who agrees with the number of the person of its antecedent. So in here, the singularity or the plurality of the relative pronoun who depends on its antecedent. So if the antecedent is singular, the word who or the pronoun who will function as a singular subject. The verb must be in its singular form. But if the number of person or if the antecedent is in its plural form, the relative pronoun who will become plural. The verb must be in its plural form. For example, he was one of the students. So our antecedent here is the word students. So since it is in plural form, again, the relative pronoun who will become plural or will function as a plural subject. The verb must be in its plural form. Okay, he was one of the students who were recognized for the many achievements given to the school. Okay, so that is rule number 16. Okay, so those are this the 16 rules. I'm sorry, I have miscalculated it. I thought we will be having 17 rules today, but we will just be having 16 of them. Okay, so those are the 16 rules or the 16 subject verb agreements. So I hope that you understood it. Okay, so I if ever you have questions, kindly send it on our GC and I am willing to answer your questions. So that's it for today. Have a great day ahead and see you on our next meeting.